The keys felt like bricks in my hand as I stood staring at what was supposed to be our forever home. Only now, it wasn't mine anymore. For 3 whole years, Jason and I had pored over every little detail, choosing everything from the rustic beams in the living room to that huge wraparound porch where we dreamed of growing old together. But now it belonged to Haley, his 23-year-old side chick. And the kicker? He practically gave it to her. Sold it for $1, less than the cost of a lousy cup of coffee. My name's Rachel Dunley. I'm 35, and I never thought I'd be starting over like this. But there I was, watching the man I'd been married to for 12 years stuffing his clothes into a suitcase, wearing the smug grin of someone who thought he'd just come out on top. "You can't be serious," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my stomach was in knots. "We built this place together." Jason didn't even look up. "Actually, I built it," he said, shoving shirts into a duffel bag. "My name's on everything, remember? You were always too buried in your law firm to deal with what you called the boring stuff." He wasn't wrong. I had trusted him completely to oversee the build while I focused on growing my career as a property attorney. Oh, the irony. "So you just signed it over to her for $1? I asked, watching his face. That smug little smirk of his grew wider. "Totally legit transaction, Ratch. You know that better than anyone. $1 is valid consideration for a property transfer. The deed's filed. Done deal. Nothing you can do about it." He thought he was untouchable. But he wasn't as clever or as thorough as he believed. Just hours earlier, I'd stumbled across a file buried deep in the construction records. And that little document changed everything. "You're right," I told him quietly. "The deed's been recorded, every page of it." Something about my tone must have hit him, because he finally looked up, his cockiness fading a little. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, turning away. "I hope you and Haley enjoy your time here. Although, you might want to check the fine print before you get too cozy." "Fine print," he called out. But I was already halfway to my car. Let him figure it out the hard way. I drove straight to my office, thoughts swirling. I couldn't stop thinking about the moment this whole mess unraveled. Just 2 weeks ago, during a late night at the firm, one of my colleagues had poked her head into my office looking uneasy. "Rachel," she said, hovering awkwardly at the door. "There's something you need to see." She handed me a property transfer. My stomach dropped. It was our house, transferred from Jason to Haley Collins for $1 single. The paperwork had been filed just 3 days earlier. I stared at it, feeling like someone had pulled the ground out from beneath me. But once the shock passed, something else took its place: resolve. I wasn't just anyone. I was a real estate attorney. If Jason thought he could outplay me in my own profession, he had another thing coming. I spent the next 48 hours combing through every page related to the construction. Jason had insisted on handling all the documents, saying it would be smoother if the house was only in his name, since he was managing the build. And I'd agreed blindly. I'd trusted him. But buried in all that paperwork was a clause he clearly missed, or never bothered to read. A standard clause, at least in our area, for custom builds. If the property was sold for less than its market value within the first 5 years, it would automatically be flagged for reassessment by the county. And not just any reassessment. The clause spelled out that the county would revalue the house based on current market worth, and the seller would be immediately on the hook for the tax difference between sale price and market value. And since Jason had sold the place for $1 and the house was worth about $2.8 million, yeah, that tax bill was going to be absolutely brutal. The best part? That clause was nestled deep within the deed restrictions, and those transferred right along with the property. The only way to nullify them was with my signature. And guess what? I hadn't signed a damn thing. I couldn't help but grin, remembering the flicker of confusion on Jason's face when I mentioned the fine print. He probably figured it out right around the time the county assessor's office rang him up with the tax estimate. My phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. I had more important things to focus on. Then there was the other document I uncovered, a bank statement showing a string of transfers from our joint account into a separate account under Jason's name. Turns out, he'd been slowly siphoning off money, setting up his escape plan one step at a time. But he messed up, big time. He used our shared account to cover every cost related to building that house. Which meant every single dollar could be traced directly back to our marital assets. And in our state, that gave me a legitimate claim to half the property's value, regardless of whose name was listed on the deed. Another text lit up my screen. Answer me, Rachel. What fine print? I dropped my phone onto the desk and pulled up the county assessor's website. Right on cue, there it was, a formal notice of review triggered by the recent transfer. Jason was about to receive a very official letter letting him know the storm was coming. The phone started ringing. His name flashed across the screen, but I didn't bother picking up. Let him sit with it. Let him worry. I spent the rest of that afternoon drafting paperwork, a claim for equitable division of marital property, a petition for an emergency injunction to freeze any further asset transfers, and a comprehensive breakdown of every dollar tied to the home's construction. By the time I finally left the office, I had 7 missed calls and more than a dozen increasingly panicked texts from Jason. The last one read, "You knew. You knew this would happen." Of course I knew. I wasn't just some clueless spouse. I was a real estate attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of legal and tax scenario. Did he honestly think I wouldn't know how to shield myself? I drove back to the apartment, the same one I'd insisted we keep, even after the house was finished. Jason had pushed to sell it right away, but something inside me told me to hang on to it. Maybe deep down I sensed the storm was coming. As I pulled into the lot, I spotted his car parked in the visitor's space. And there he was, pacing by the entrance like a man unraveling. That cocky attitude from earlier? Completely gone. "Do you even realize what you've done?" he snapped as I walked up. "The tax bill alone, it's more than I earn in 5 years." I typed in the code to the building and opened the door without looking at him. "That's rough," I said, holding back every ounce of satisfaction. He trailed after me inside. "You have to help me fix this. Just lift the deed restriction. Please, Rachel, I'm begging you. I'm gonna lose everything." I turned to look at him, really look at him. The man I'd loved for over a decade. The same man who'd betrayed me in every possible way, now standing there, desperate for the lifeline he didn't deserve. "You already lost everything," I said quietly. "You lost it the day you signed our house over to your girlfriend. This tax mess? That's just the fallout from your choices." "I'll fight it," he snapped. "I'll tell them I didn't know about the clause." I let out a short laugh. "Be my guest. You signed the deed, Jason. You're a business guy. People expect you to actually read what you sign. But sure, tell a judge you transferred a nearly $3 million property for $1 and never glanced at the restrictions. Let me know how that goes." He looked like someone had drained every bit of color from his face. The weight of what he'd done was finally sinking in. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Want?" I echoed. "I don't want anything from you. You made your choice. Now live with it." I turned the key and stepped into my apartment, closing the door behind me. Through the wood, I heard his voice rise again. "What about Haley? She can't afford those taxes either." "Well then," I said, not even bothering to raise my voice, "she might want to consider selling. Hopefully she gets more than $1 for it." I leaned against the door as his voice faded into the hallway. My heart was pounding, but I felt steady. Solid. The first part of my plan was already unfolding. Jason had just realized the tax nightmare he'd triggered, but he hadn't even glimpsed what was coming next. By tomorrow, he'd be served with my motion to divide our marital assets. The day after, he'd learn about the emergency court order freezing all property transfers. And before the week was up, he'd find out that the secret account he'd been quietly feeding, that trail was going to lead straight to a legal disaster for him. My phone buzzed again in my hand. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jason. "We can fix this. Please." I screwed up. I switched the phone to silent and poured myself a glass of Pinot. One thing Jason had gotten right. He had messed up. Repeatedly. But his biggest blunder? Thinking I wouldn't fight back. I settled into the chair at my desk and pulled out the growing pile of documents. Bank statements, construction invoices, transfer records, all of it meticulously organized. The evidence painted a clear picture. Sure, it was a story of betrayal. But more than that, it was a case study in arrogance and sloppiness. Jason had been so wrapped up in his secret life with Haley that he stopped paying attention to the very thing that would destroy him: details. And if there's one thing a good attorney never overlooks, it's the details. The next morning, I was at the office before the sun was up. 3 manila envelopes sat neatly on my desk, each containing legal papers ready to be served to Jason. I glanced at my phone. 5 more missed calls. A new batch of texts waited like little grenades. The county called. The tax bill is almost $1 million. Help me, please. Haley's panicking. We can work something out. Name your terms. I set the phone aside and turned back to my screen. County property records now showed the deed transfer to Haley was fully processed. That was exactly what I'd hoped for. It meant she was now officially responsible for the future property taxes. Meanwhile, Jason still owed the transfer tax, a hefty one. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. Rachel, your 9 o'clock is here, my assistant said. I smoothed my blazer. Send him in. Marcus Lynn, the forensic accountant I'd brought on board, stepped into my office carrying a thick folder of evidence. You were absolutely right, he said without wasting time. The trail's crystal clear. Your husband didn't just use marital funds for the house, he's been moving money for months. Systematically. He laid the documents across my desk. Bank records, wire transfers, investments quietly liquidated. Jason had been playing the long game, preparing his exit behind my back. The silver lining? Marcus continued. He's terrible at hiding his tracks. Every move is documented. He filtered everything through your joint account, probably thinking it'd make things harder to trace. But it actually works in our favor. It gives us a complete timeline. I gave a tight smile. How much total? Marcus flipped to a summary page. About $3.2 million, not counting the house. That number hit like a punch to the chest. All those years we'd spent building a life together, and he'd been planning to walk away with nearly everything. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jason. The bank's threatening to freeze my accounts. What did you do? What I'd done was simple. I'd filed an emergency request for a court-ordered asset freeze as part of my divorce action. And based on the financial evidence I submitted, the judge hadn't hesitated to sign off. The timing's in our favor, Marcus said, stacking the papers back into his folder. Most of these transactions happened after he got involved with Haley. We can argue premeditated fraud. I thanked him and walked him to the elevator. When I returned to my desk, a new email was waiting from the county assessor's office. Their review of the property transfer was complete. The final tax bill would be issued that day. Right on schedule. My phone rang again. This time it wasn't Jason, it was Haley. Ms. Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. I need to talk to you. About the house. You mean your house? I asked, keeping my voice calm and even. The one you bought for $1? I didn't know, she said quickly. About the taxes. Jason never told me. I can't pay them and the bank won't give me a loan. Because, I said, finishing for her, you have zero equity in the property. You paid next to nothing, so there's nothing for the bank to secure against. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Jason says his accounts are frozen. I don't have that kind of money. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. This young woman, barely older than my little sister, sounded like she was on the verge of collapse. Sell it, I said, finally. That's your best bet. The taxes are due in 30 days. Sell now. Use the proceeds to pay the tax bill and walk away with something, I said. But won't Jason be furious? I almost laughed. Jason's anger isn't your responsibility anymore, Haley. He used you as a pawn. And it backfired. My advice? Get out now while you still have a choice. There was a long pause on the line. Then she spoke quietly. He said you were going to try to take the house back. That's why he put it in my name. I don't want the house, I replied calmly. I want what's fair. And right now, you're caught in the middle of something very messy. Sell the house. Pay the taxes. Move on with your life. After she hung up, I sat in silence, thinking about how much had changed in just 24 hours. Jason's grand scheme was coming apart thread by thread, and he was finally starting to feel it. The next few days were a blur of court filings, hearings, and paperwork. Jason hired a top-tier attorney, one of the most expensive in the city. But even they couldn't argue with hard facts. Every dollar transferred, every shell account created, every attempt to hide our shared money, it was all documented. The transfer tax bill came through just as Marcus calculated, $980,000, payable immediately. Jason's attorney tried to challenge the deed restriction, calling it unconscionable, but the judge disagreed. That clause was standard in our jurisdiction, and Jason had signed the deed voluntarily. A week later, my phone rang again. It was Haley. I'm selling the house, she said. There's a buyer offering full market value. I just thought I should tell you. That's a smart choice, I said. He's furious, she continued. He says I'm betraying him. That after everything he's done for me, I owe him. She gave a bitter laugh, as if saying it out loud helped her realize how twisted it all was. You don't owe him anything, I said gently. He used you. And he didn't care what it cost you. After we hung up, I opened the latest financial report Marcus had sent. Jason's efforts to cover his tracks had, ironically, provided us with everything we needed to ensure a fair division in the divorce. 2 weeks later, the house sold for $2.9 million. Haley used the proceeds to pay the tax bill and still walked away with enough to start over. Word eventually reached me that she'd moved back to Oregon to be near family. Jason, on the other hand, wasn't as lucky. The tax hit had drained most of his liquidity. The divorce revealed his full financial mismanagement, and his reputation in the business world, once spotless, was now in shambles. One evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the final settlement documents, my phone buzzed with a message from him. You've destroyed everything I built. I considered replying, maybe reminding him that we had built that life together, that he was the one who chose to betray it. But I said nothing. Instead, I looked out at the skyline, calm and quiet. The dream house was gone, sold to a family who would truly appreciate it. And the life I thought I'd have with Jason? Gone too. But in its place, something stronger had taken root: resilience. Another message buzzed in. I never thought you'd fight back like this. That was his fatal miscalculation. He spent so many years seeing me as the agreeable wife, the one who let him manage everything, who never pushed back. He forgot who I really was, a woman who knew the law better than he ever would, and who had finally remembered how to use it. The final divorce settlement was equitable, down to the last cent. His attempt to outmaneuver me had only made my case stronger. Every hidden account, every unauthorized transfer now out in the open. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, partner, finally. The view was stunning, but it wasn't the skyline I appreciated most. It was the peace. The betrayal still stung sometimes, but it no longer defined me. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from my sister. Saw Jason at a restaurant. He looked awful. You okay? I smiled. Better than okay. I'm free. Free from the deception. Free from the weight of trying to fix something already broken. Jason had tried to take everything, but in the end, all he really did was show me just how strong I am. The house was gone, but I was still standing. And that was worth more than any home or bank account could ever be.